I think where we are getting at is obviously you are regularly, deeply, intensely living this. So this isn't like a matter of technique for you at this point. And this isn't like something someone can say, oh, I have a checklist for conflict, something mining or conflict resolution. Whereas saying, look, I'm doing it and I'm very comfortable with it. What's the one thing you can tell that helped you be so good at this or so comfortable with this?
Yeah, let me tell you a story if that's okay, Dr. Singh.
Oh, please go for it.
So I am a critical care doc, and actually
Mhm.
our ICU went to #1 in the nation. To give you an example, we had 1 year with 60 ICU nurses with zero nurse turnover.
Very nice.
And we had gone 3 years without any, urinary tract infections, central line infections, skin breakdown, falls, or ventilator associated pneumonias, and
Mhm.
really had an incredible kind of setting. And so I saw a decision made that I didn't agree with, and I decided that I needed to move into an executive position. So that's how I became a CMO. Is I really sort of got perturbed with a decision that was made, went and got a master's and became a CMO. But
Mhm.
I was not prepared to become an executive leader. My leadership style was autocratic. I really was a Jim Collins. If you don't have the same beliefs on my bus, then hey, don't bounce as I kick you out the door.
Mhm.
And it really was not effective at a senior leadership position to have that leadership style. The second thing is I felt, because I am from Montana and because nobody had ever graduated from college in my family except my one cousin in art, I really felt like I needed to help people understand that I was valuable to invest in, that I could make a difference. And so I found myself consuming the oxygen in many rooms. I would have such great ideas in my mind that I needed to share with people that I was actually smart, that I could actually do that. And although people appreciated me and my ideas, they found it very frustrating that I wouldn't shut up, basically.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I have always pursued a coach. Each of my contracts, I've negotiated a coach to help me,
Mhm.
acclimate and to be a better leader. And so I got a great coach, and he listened to a bunch of other people, and he said, Jeremy, you're not listening to understand. And
Mhm.
that was the first introduction to that. And then as I sort of began to think about it, I really began this mantra that I think I probably already said a couple times, and that is, I want to listen to understand, not to reply. So my goal is not, when can I tell you what I think now? It's, my goal is, how can I understand what you're thinking, and can I do it without judgment, so I can be a good partner for you, so I can serve you, because I'm a servant leader. And
Mhm.
so I would tell the audience that's where it all began for me. And that's really where it should begin for people. So
Mhm.
when I lead groups, I many times start with two things. One is I have them do what I call a 4-part breath. So, how many parts are there to a breath? I ask my audience. They're almost always a healthcare audience. And as you know, as a physician, people will go 2 or 3,
Two.
but they're really nervous because
Mhm.
they do not want to say the wrong answer, right? It's the way we're built. And this seems like such a simple question, though they think it's a trick question. But if you think about a heartbeat, you have a contraction, and then a pause, and then a
Mhm.
relaxation and a pause. Well,
Mhm.
breathing's the same. You have an inhalation and a pause, and an
Mhm.
exhalation and a pause. So there's 4 parts to a breath. So
Mhm.
now they're sort of thinking about the breath. They've sort of forgotten a little bit what they came into the room with or where they're going to. So
Mhm.
then I ask them if they're safe to close their eyes, and we do a 4-part breath. And
Mhm.
by the end of it, then I ask, how many of you were not thinking about the breath during this period of time? In my experience, it's usually 10% or less. So
Mhm.
now 90% of my audience is engaged with me and present. And then
Mhm.
I have them do a listening exercise. And this is super easy. And I would recommend any listener do this at home. Take your loved one or your friend and ask them, this is a very non-threatening question. What in your professional life gives you fulfillment today? And then give them a minute, time it, a minute or 2 minutes, and then just try to listen to understand, not to reply without judgment. And your goal is, you can't say anything. You can say, wow, interesting. Or you could say, just say a little bit more about that, please. But that's it. All you can do is facilitate them to share. And then you flip it at 2 minutes. And when I do that, then I ask people, well, who liked listening the most? And a group will raise their hand and I'll say, tell me why. And they'll say, well, because I really felt like I was giving them a gift. And like I had shut down my brain. I could actually hear what they had to say. And that was so valuable. And then the other group is the ones who wanted to be listened to. And they said, it felt like for the first time in a long time, somebody actually cared enough to truly listen. It's a very intense experience, but it's a way to get an idea of what does it feel like to either be listened to that way or to listen to someone that way. And if you just begin by that, and then look on your calendar and in the next week, identify one conversation where you really think it would be valuable if you just worked on listening to understand, not reply. And what you'll find is that becomes more powerful and you grow upon it. And I have to repeat this all the time. I have a daughter with learning disabilities who loves to watch Charmed, and she wants to tell me about Charmed and, and sees them as her friends. And after a while, when you've been with this kid for 30 years, Charmed gets a little old. And I find that sometimes I slip out of that and I sort of play with my phone or my watch or whatever. But I think if it appears that I've sort of, I'm in the midst of mastering something and they want to look at, well, how would I start on my journey to not be intimidated? Start by listening to understand, not reply without judgment, because it's such a respectful way to go. And then it allows you for the other person to feel as if they've been heard. They actually can hear what you have to say. So I think that's the starting point.
Seek first to understand. In fact, listening is a gift that great spiritual traditions talk about it. You give.
Yeah.
And now the science of positive psychology calls it active constructive responding. You gave such beautiful examples of that. This is like a textbook example of active constructive responding that you showed us.
Well, and Dr. Singh, I wanted to comment. Many people talk about active listening, or and what it is you give these responses, kind of thing. And I find that is not; those are not synonyms. And I really think you can do a form of active listening with really just waiting to reply. And I think that's destructive. And I spent a lot of my life doing that. But about the last 10 years, I've really done everything I could to listen, to understand, not reply without judgment. And actually, if the listeners are interested, on my LinkedIn, I've done an interview and an article on mindful listening, which is another way of saying, listen to understand, not reply without judgment.
I'll put a link to that, and I'll maybe, if you can send it to me in the email, and I'll definitely put a link to that. And with this sort of intellectual nutrient concept that it's going to help you grow, you also make a very solid point that mining for conflict will not only improve relationships or physician engagement or retention, it will also improve patient quality and safety.
Oh, I 100% agree, especially with physicians, because in a leadership position, you're going to have physicians that are going to come to you with an issue. Now, there's ones that are going to come in a constructive fashion. And then you're going to have these disruptive moments where the behavior is an unacceptable behavior. In my experience, all of those behaviors are, or at least almost all of them, are a reflection of a clinical issue that the doctor or the nurse practitioner felt was egregious. They just have a behavioral response that is so unacceptable, people can lose track of the why they had this response. So I really think that mindful listening allows you to manage both of those. So the first, you can hold them accountable for their behavior. And then in a second conversation, maybe with you or someone else, you can really look at what was the quality issue and be able to assess it. Now, what's really interesting is Dr. Hickson out of Vanderbilt with their Cup of Coffee program has actually done a bunch of research on when you go to providers and share with them that the behavior that they had was unacceptable.
Mhm.
Could they consider a different way of responding in the future? That somewhere around 87 to 90% of those who they've done their studies with, just one intervention was needed for their whole career. And then
Mhm.
the ones that have more than that interventions required or higher levels of intervention then are often associated with quality issues such as,
Mhm.
you know, uh, bad surgical outcomes or lawsuits or
Mhm.
bad interactions with teammates.
Mhm.
And so I think mining for conflict really allows us to define expectations of team professional behavior. And I firmly believe in all settings, whether you're talking psychiatry, critical care, hospitalist, ED, ambulatory, even pathology, a
Mhm.
team experience leads to a higher level of quality because medicine's so complex anymore. So I think there's that general kind of quality. The other one, though, is there's specific interventions. So I have multiple hospitals, and one of my hospitals, the surgeons at that hospital have a higher observed versus expected mortality.
Mhm.
And yet they are renowned with among their teams as having great hands, great interaction skills, and being seen as excellent surgeons.
Mhm.
So why do we have that disparity? And I
Mhm.
suspect it's because of the way they're charting or the way we're interacting with their charting. But if you take that away, a great way to mine for conflict is to have a quality meeting with them to say, hey, we've got a number that just doesn't fit with how we think about you.
Mhm.
Could you help us figure out what that might be?
Mhm.
And right there, instead of saying, look, you guys have a very high observed to expected mortality, you got to fix this.
Mhm.
That's generating conflict and battle. But by going in with
Um,
curiosity, could you help me understand what we can do to support you or
mhm.
to look at this? And would you support an investigation?
Mhm.
Now, you're in a position to listen to understand, not reply
Mhm.
without judgment, and
Mhm.
then be able to give data that draws them in as partners. Imagine the acceleration of
Mhm.
that general surgery program as they now are felt to be valued and engaging as partners rather than being questioned whether they have good technique. Now, there are times we may find that there's a bad technique issue or one that could be improved upon, but they'll be partners in discovering that. And I think I think that's a great way of an example of improving quality. Another one that's had nothing to do with me, but was very interesting is I was at a facility where we didn't have enough OBGYNs, and the family medicine docs had gone to uh, a special fellowship to increase
Mhm.
their ability to care for more complex OB patients and
Mhm.
gynecology patients.
Mhm.
And the OBGYNs felt very protective of their service, and they did not want those privileges to be given to the family medicine docs who had gone through this training, and yet they didn't have enough OBGYNs to cover the deliveries or their services. And so it went to the medical executive committee for a decision. On that medical executive committee, very uniquely, were two layman representatives that had been trained and had fulfilled job descriptions and were committed to confidentiality. So
Mhm.
they were there for that whole conversation. And at the end, one of the lay people asked the question that nobody else in the profession asked. And they said, let me understand this correctly. I've listened carefully. You're telling me that you do not have enough manpower to be able to care for our community,
Mhm.
and that we have identified that we do have manpower that has the skill set to care for our community, and yet you won't accept them as colleagues. It was beautiful. I mean, what were they supposed to do?
Beautiful.
So,
Yeah.
we adopted that and what criteria and what metrics we would look at for quality, and both parties were engaged, and they
Mhm.
developed a symbiotic relationship that over time became very fulfilling for all, and our community benefited from it. So I really think it's everywhere. And when we have those kind of conversations, it turns out it becomes safer to have those conversations, and people develop trust, and it has to be done from a respectful fashion. And now what I define as conflict would not even dawn on the layperson when they watch this happen. They wouldn't know what to call that. They just would never think, because it was a generative, constructive conversation, which really is pre-conflict or a version of conflict. So
Mhm.
that's why I mine for it at all levels.